Okay, great. That was much better. I'm Marcel Polednik. I have the distinct privilege of serving as the Donna and Donald Baumgartner Director of the Milwaukee Art Museum. Oh, thank you. That's very kind. I am so delighted to welcome you to the museum this evening for our artists lecture featuring a very distinguished guest, David Claerbout, who is also the artist behind the exhibition that we're featuring in the Baker Roland Galleries, The Close. And David joins us tonight from Antwerp, Belgium. So he's made quite the journey to be here with us tonight. Thank you so much, David. We're glad you're here. Before I introduce the artist and all of his accolades and all of the wonderful things that make his work interesting, I wanted to thank the individuals who made this exhibition possible. And I wanted to begin with our very own staff of the Milwaukee Art Museum, who are really amazing. First, I want to thank Margaret Andera, our interim chief curator and curator of contemporary art, who sadly could not be here this evening because she is ill on her birthday. So we send her our very best wishes for a speedy recovery, and we're sad that she couldn't be here with us to celebrate tonight. David Russick, our chief designer, who I applaud for his, once again, impeccable taste and flawless design of this exhibition. Our stellar art prep team, Arthur Mohegan, our chief preparator, and his wonderful crew of colleagues, Neil Gasparka, Paul Mitchell, and Craig Pshabilski, who spared no details to make sure this exhibition really looked stellar. And one of the things that might be difficult to understand is, think about when you bake a cake, and the simplest cake, right, a tarte tatin, is actually the most complicated to pull off because you cannot hide your mistakes. There are just 4 or 5 ingredients, and if you don't hit it right, it doesn't work. So this kind of project for us was a veritable challenge from that perspective, in that we're dealing with the purest sensibilities and the purest ingredients, and so every detail truly matters, and the team, I think, did a wonderful job. Finally, I'd like to thank Ted Brusser-Bardis, our Director of Gallery Media and AV Systems, and my team up there in the booth is nodding their heads, because he was in charge of the AV for this exhibition, which, if you've seen it and if you see it after this program, you will notice is really commendable. So many thanks to the team, especially those who I just mentioned. Let's give them a round of applause, shall we? I also wanted to thank our colleagues at the Claerbout Studio, who have also been wonderful collaborators on this project. Christophe Leunis from Vertigo Creative Studio in Antwerp oversaw the technical aspects of the installation, and he was really wonderful to have here at the museum and a great partner for our team here in Milwaukee. Siling Ah from the Artist Studio, who is here with us tonight, and we welcome her to the Milwaukee Art Museum. And we also welcome Jeffrey Grove from the Sean Kelly Gallery in New York, who has flown in for this program. So welcome to you both. We're very glad you're here. I also wanted to thank our 2022 visionaries, that's our leading philanthropic circle at the Milwaukee Art Museum, who support all of the exhibitions and all of the programs that we put on year-round. And so I will name them because they are truly magnificent. Donna and Donald Baumgartner, Murph Burke, Joel and Karen Quadracci, Sue and Bud Seelig, and Jeff and Gail Yabuki and the Yabuki Family Foundation. Many thanks to them for their generous support. And of course, the Milwaukee Art Museum's own Contemporary Art Society, who sponsored tonight's gathering and have been formidable partners in presenting contemporary art at the museum for many decades. Thank you to all of our CAS members and leadership, many of whom are with us tonight. Yes. And a final thanks to all of the members of the Milwaukee Art Museum, without whom we couldn't do all the things that we do year-round, and without whose support and ambassadorship, we would be much diminished. So thank you to all of you who are members in the audience. If you're interested in becoming a member, there are many staff in the room who would love to help you with that, including Rachel Belmer. Where are you, Rachel? Raise your hand. She's our Director of Memberships. She will seek you out, and she can sniff out non-members, so beware. Okay, finally, I wanted to introduce our guest of honor this evening, David Claerbout, who is known for his work using photography, video, digital technology, and sound. His large-scale immersive installations consider questions of time, memory, and truth. Since the first videos in the mid-1990s, his work rapidly gained complexity. And with the introduction of digital media in the early 2000s, it evolved into an almost completely synthetic image practice, which put him at the forefront of new media art. He has shown his works worldwide, among others in Kunsthaus Bregenz, Austria, the Städel Museum in Frankfurt, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Centre Pompidou in Paris, the Pinakothek der Moderne in Munich, and the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. The close, which is the central piece of our exhibition, was completed this year in 2022 and is conceived as a journey traversing the past and the future of the camera, bringing together a reconstruction of amateur footage made in the 1920s and a digital 3D rendering of that footage. And we'll unpack that a little bit into the program. The silence scene, which shows barefoot children in a brick-walled one-way alley, otherwise known as a close, transitions from grainy footage of a child into a highly detailed, quasi-technical portrait, objectifying face, eyes, and body. Accompanying this transformation, a recording of 24 spatially distinct singers performing Arvo Pärt's 2004 vocal composition, Da Pace Domine, surrounds the isolated child with an architecture of voices. The close oscillates between sensorial cohesion and fragmentation, the familiar and the estranged. Intended as a short emotional history of the camera, the close reflects on what Claerbout refers to as dark optics, a profound, if chaotic, recalibration of the beliefs we share regarding image, information, and language. A key element of Claerbout's installation work is the relationship with its space, the space that it's actually shown in. And in this case, the close interacts beautifully with the Calatrava-designed architecture of the Milwaukee Art Museum. If you haven't had a chance to see the exhibition yet, I highly encourage you to do so tonight after the program or at a future visit. We are thrilled that the close is making its premiere at a U.S. museum here in Milwaukee, at the Milwaukee Art Museum. We are the first in the United States to show it, and we are very proud of that. Yes, let's give ourselves a round of applause. After David finishes his presentation, I will join him on stage for a Q&A. I have a couple of questions to get us started, but then we will seek out further questions from the audience. So please reserve your questions until that time. With that, please join me in welcoming David Claerbout to the Milwaukee Art Museum.
Thank you, Marcella. While you were talking, I realized I was bragging that I was known to have talks, to hold talks which last more than 2 hours, and good at making everyone fall asleep. And I also realized there's a detail which I didn't bring tonight, is that usually those talks showed like 10 installations at least, and I have brought just one tonight, so maybe it's going to be a challenge to spend the 40 minutes around the close, but I think we should work. And otherwise we make it a little closer, a little earlier, open to questions maybe. So I make one piece a year, one video installation a year, and in wintertime I draw. I hibernate in my studio, and I prepare the next piece, the next idea that will be usually recorded in springtime, summertime. And it became, you know, it was not a system, but it became a rhythm like that. I always had the ambition to produce more than one piece per year, but it just never worked out. That seems to be the rhythm that we, with my studio, work in, which makes that I have, do you know, Céline, how many pieces we've made? 30? Something like that. Maybe more. Okay, so we did do a little bit more than one per year, and the close, however, was a champion in the longest duration of production. I think the longest was 16 years, a while ago, and the idea came to me in around 2009, 2010, when I heard. Again, I was doing research on something else, probably, and I usually don't have music, but occasionally I do. Because music has a tendency of really infecting in a nice way ideas, and you see images, and you see spaces, and you see situations through music or through sound. And there it was. So on the radio was the sound track that we have in the installation, which is a short piece by Arvo Pärt. He's an Estonian composer, a very Christian-inspired composer, still alive. He's very old now. I talked to him a few times in my life. He's very popular, at least I don't know if it's the case in the United States, but over in Europe he's extremely popular as Da Pacem Domine, not so much. It's a choral piece. It's one of the lesser known works, but voila, there it was, one day in 2009 or 2010. I saw something in front of me. There was no image, so it's a bit deceiving because it looks like there's an image and a film, and then I found a soundtrack for it, but it's the other way around. The sound came first. And I never work with soundtracks. It's either the sound finds me or I don't use sound. It's usually I work with silent pieces if I can. Not in this case. And so why the sound? I suppose because it had a quality of groups of singers communicating with one another, as if one was asking something and then there came a reply, and then there was another question and there came a reply. And you notice when you're in the installation that you can feel individual voices at some point in one speaker, and then there's a reply on the other side. So there is a back and forth between more voices and fewer voices. There's a kind of individuality, but also there's a sense of being surrounded by a group of singers that envelop the space, and also yourself as a viewer. And immediately I had the idea of mute cinema, literally as a kind of handicapped image, which never had the opportunity to have a voice. And accidentally, often the people portrayed in those times, in very early movie making, were people in streets, portrayed by people who were usually well off or well off enough and experimental enough to have a camera and to put it in the street. And there was a fashion at that time also to portray city life. Basically to go out and put the camera in the middle of a street and portray people who would usually be very fascinated with the presence of such a camera, because it was life-changing. Having your image taken by a moving image camera was life-changing. Photography already was known enough, but then there was this moving image, and moving image had this quality of really promising to keep your living animation forever captured on celluloid. So naturally people come up to the camera and they're fascinated and they walk around the camera and they usually do things. We all know that. Today, in 2022, we're on the other side, where it's harder to find a place where there's no camera, and it feels rather exclusive to be in a place with no cameras. if it were not your mobile phone to begin with. So you have to be either in bed, sick, or something else in order to put that thing away. So we're on the other side, which is a bit of a giveaway and a difficulty in the way, because I'm going to talk to you and show you images about how I produce the work. I'm going to show you into my kitchen. And one of the difficulties that we found with the reconstruction of the original footage, which dates from around 1910, was that people are absolutely not impressed with cameras. And so you can't ask two actors to feel excited about the presence of the cameras, because they just are not. So that posed a first challenge, which no one ever thinks about until you start producing. So here we have one of the stills of the original footage, and a close is, as the word says, is I believe it's a typical Glasgow way of saying it's a dead-end alley, dead-end little street, usually in a poor neighborhood. And the neighborhood that's depicted in the image doesn't exist anymore, because, of course, shortly after it was torn down and replaced by modern style buildings. So we had the sound in a way very much enveloping you and very much taking care of, through this very precise vocal quality, kind of offering an answer to the lack of voice, which is very often in mute cinema so present. Another thing that struck me also was that those people that are usually portrayed, they don't have a voice at that time. They don't even vote. So they don't have a political voice, but they didn't actually have a technological voice neither. And I thought that was going to be a metaphor around which I was going to work. And somehow the idea of a child also came from that footage. A child which had to be smaller than everybody else, a bit hidden away, a bit shy, and that then this child would become this hyper-defined, almost object at the end of the film. So this is how ideas are born, I suppose. They're always born complete. I think I'm always fascinated with why artists communicate so few about their ideas, because it's a little bit like secret matter. If you have the feeling that if you communicate too much, you give away too much. So I like to show some of the stuff, and then this is how I begin. I start with some sketches, and we in the beginning it's just me, myself, and I breaking down how I could produce this. What do we need, and the particularity of this counterlight in the footage. This counterlight was, I thought it was interesting because it was it's a cold morning light, and it has a lot of materiality to it. You feel humidity on the floor. You're not exactly sure whether it's winter or summer, but all the materials are there, although you don't see too much. So I got kind of stuck with this idea, and then started building very simply as a pre-visualization in the computer, a space. At the same time, I draw, and I always, the drawings that we have in the exhibition are drawings that I made towards the end of the film. Why? Practically because I have lost overview over, you work for several years and you work with many people, and you lose sight of what the original intentions were. And in order to grasp that again, towards the end I make those series of drawings that we see here. But then there's also those very small sketches in my sketchbook where I'm just trying to figure out how intense the gaze should be, because I quickly figured out that this child was very important. The child had to be shy, it had to be absolutely the contrary of a small actor, but the gaze had to be intense. And of course, how do you do that when everybody's well fed and happy and was wearing shoes? And how do you get that from the face of a modern happy child? So, well, I mean, I have my methods, and if they don't work, we improvise. We always improvise. So, studies of trying to break down the movements in a street around 1910 in Glasgow. What do people do? They're always in a hurry. They go back and forth. And a lot of running going on, I noticed. And so with this material, I go to my team and we discuss, and we start seeing the difficulties. And I knew, I'm one of these artists who have a rather perverse technological thing, which doesn't make the production of work easier, rather the opposite. There is something you might have noticed, there is something in the film that is a bit of a conundrum. It's a transition between analog film, early celluloid movie, and then the opposite, CGI produced image of that child. And you might have noticed that there's no interruption, there's no cut, there is no break, there's no transition. If you look well, you see some grain in the celluloid turning into dust, into three-dimensional dust. And that posed a big challenge to us. And how on earth are we going to make that transition from a celluloid video type of image to a perfectly crisp CGI computer-generated image? So that was the Achilles heel of the production. And the way we did it was by, the solution came many years later, because at one point I thought I wouldn't find the answer to how to produce this. But I realized that if we produce the film backwards, so if we start with the end of the film in the production, if we start with finding the way of portraying this child in a three-dimensional way, because that's what it is at the end. You have the three dimensions of the sound that fill the room, but then you also have the camera, which kind of becomes, it loses its grounding. It starts to float around a child and takes all these details of the child, and it becomes this dehumanized camera. All this required that we did the child first, so that we scanned the child, and that we had this all in our heads on how to do this, and that we worked our way back, and ended basically with the beginning of the film. And I'll show you some images a little bit later. More drawings of those are towards the end of the production, where they're very rough, on very rough watercolor paper. And I started my career as a lithographer and as a draftsman, a bit of painting, but I never really, well, I was okay with painting, but it was just too heavy on my shoulders to become a painter. I didn't see myself making masterpieces all the time. So I thought photography and film were very liberating in that sense, and especially working with found imagery. So why not use the ideas of another person and go further from there? Why not use, why not give a second life to archival imagery? And this lithography of earlier days has its influence in the drawings. I work, what you see here is it's quite a big, thick watercolor paper with a very rough texture. And I will usually start with this and keep it that way, and then scan this image, this drawing, scan it into the computer, and then continue drawing on a Wacom or this Kintec. Maybe some of you see what I mean. It's this big tablets where you can draw. And that allows me to go very much into detail, while this is pretty rough. I'm not someone who, who's very patient per se when I begin. But from there, from the rough part, I refine and I look for pictorial depth. So there I'm going to usually look for something that I want to find in the end result, in the film itself. Grainy, but still very precise. And then, I'm not sure why I put this here, because this is a different image, but I wanted to just show you this. This is a stage further where I have already, in fact, then printed the work I've been working on in my computer, with my digital pen. I've printed that on top of either the original drawing, or I've printed it on top of a new paper, which allows me to continue working with watercolor. So maybe you notice that there's some procedural thinking also in the drawings. And this is something I'm very keen on. I have this ridiculous pride of doing that, especially during winter. And it's a way of meditating about work, but it's also a way of getting to new ideas usually. Then the production of the work itself, a few impressions. I'm not quite sure actually. I grabbed this from the archive that we kept on the piece. I guess here my technicians are putting together a few elements of the image. Nothing of what you have seen in the film, although it's a one-on-one replica of the original film, or I would say the original stills of the film. It's a complete reconstruction from A to Z. The walls, the light, the floor, the actors, obviously, any detail, the humidity on the floor, that winter light, that cold light, it's all been reconstructed. And you may remember I said a moment ago, the reason for that was to find the solution for the end of the film, this complicated 3D movement. So we use different techniques. We isolate our actors in front of a green screen and then cut them out, or we would track them and place them into this virtual space, which is the space in the film largely. And I mean, none of these people were necessarily there together in that street. So we had individuals and groups walking. So we had a lot of footage to work with. And then, of course, we come to the kid, which so we worked with high resolution video on beginning of the film, and the last part is done with high resolution still cameras. It's a group of 50 still cameras that make a circle, in fact half a circle, And so the reason why you don't notice this transition between one material and the other, between the virtual material and the filmic material, is because there are a few video cameras positioned next to the first photo still cameras, and they do exactly the same thing, and they allowed me to actually start moving my camera to the right. I know this sounds very complicated. I'm not sure if I'm able to convey it. But they allow me to transition from a film of moving image to a film of photography without noticing it. The high resolution of the photography then allows me to zoom in to the details of the same child, which has been recorded in a different place under different circumstances. All that brings its own set of challenges, because the child was very nervous in one place, and in the next place had been on holidays and comes back very relaxed, and you don't have the same aura. So you have to work with that. And all of a sudden that you have it, your main actor is no longer behaving the way you expected it to behave. So that's always a bit strange. But any production has its quirks. So that's the street. It's basically a carpet with plastic foil glued on top of it, and tar and oil, and but all very, very foot friendly for children of today. And then mixed with water so that it would reflect some dirt, and the street has been replicated one-on-one with green and blue screen in a studio. So all that is improvisation. There's not. I don't work with professional teams. We have a lot of fun inventing all this thing. Like, oh dear, how do we make a street that looks wet with counterlight? Well, I don't know. Let's just look it up on the internet and let's try something. And this is usually how you find the answers, and you work your way into through a film. So I have a bit of my, I don't trust, no, it's not that I don't trust, but I don't like to work with external production companies. So I work with a very small team, and I always think about it like we do guerrilla work, something that, you're supposed to do with bigger teams, but we do it with a very small team. And the benefit of that is that, of course, today, I work with people since 20 years. Today, we're like an organism that works fine on its own. So here you can see the painting being done. It's all very rough. And then this, I think, is during the first tryout. It's a GoPro time-lapse. I think you can see two cameras, and so we're basically, the whole team is in a panic because nothing looks the way we hoped it would look. Nobody does what they're asked to do. Like they would come straight up to the camera and ask, because I would be behind the operator, and ask, am I doing it right? And all these things. So this is how we built up. The second day was better. The third day was okay. And so we ended up with a lot of footage. You always need your one or two little miracles to happen. The child that you may have seen was, the difficulty was that it's a girl actually, a girl playing a boy, and being very embarrassed about it. She didn't really want to look like a boy, but accidentally cut off, together with her sister, they cut off one another's hair, and so there she was. She was the perfect cast, and she was extremely shy, so she would hide away behind her father always. And I thought I was looking for that, for this kind of angst, which would be in the eyes. And we needed this magical moment in the film where the angst would turn into a smile and where she would relax. Because I wanted it to be about the early days of cinema, where life is very tough, and then later days, where we can't deny that for most people, or at least in the West, life has become a lot better. And I wanted to have a transition between that. I wanted to make the piece about how do we see time? How do we see time passing? And how do we make this bridge between contemporary technologies and what was once upon a time contemporary technology, the newest of the newest? And so there's a suggestion that things are getting better somehow. And I always have had that. I've always tried to avoid working with tragedy. And I've always tried to work with two things that should not live with one another and that nevertheless learn to coexist. This has been central into more or less all the pieces that I've made. So more technique. This is the studio rig where we are preparing the circle, half a circle. And we're building it. It's all connected with cables. So this takes months and months and months. So maybe you start to understand why we only realize one piece per year, if we're lucky. But this, it's good to be optimistic at the beginning and desperate at the end. You know? This is what François Truffaut said. You know, when he started a movie, the production of a movie, you always start with the best intentions, and you know, in the end, you just want to go home. It's a bit of that. So here we have the green screen installed behind the cameras, and we're doing tests with the same little person. And then what you see here is already the first results of the scan, because we're not actually using the photography from the still cameras as photography so much. We're making a 3D model out of it. So we're using a technique which is called photogeometry. Today it's very common, where you will use a computer program that will guess where the figure in the space that you're photographing is situated, and it will interpolate all the images that you have into a single 3D image. So if that were not enough of a challenge, then of course came the production of the sound. I knew that Arvo Pärt was very strict about what you could do with his music and what you can't do. And I was crazy enough to propose a shortened version of Da Pacem Domine. So it's about 5 minutes, and I thought 4.5 or 4 were enough. So I had plans to shorten it, and I had even talked about it with the director, but I don't know if we really talked about it very often, but he sort of suggested that he was incompetent to rewrite it. And other people had said, absolutely don't do it, because the composer will never allow his music to be changed. So I learned to live with the idea that the soundtrack would be quite long. But the biggest challenge was how do we, because I heard it in stereophony, and I'm not competent at all, and I don't think neither is the best sound engineer competent enough to make from a stereophonic track a 26 voices track. And then came COVID, fortunately for this part of the production, and all theaters were closed. Concert halls were closed. And one day I spoke to the director of the concert hall of Bruges, which has very good acoustics. And he said, listen, maybe I can help. We have this choir which is without job, and we have the concert hall which is closed. So maybe we can produce this for you. The only drawback was that the singers had to sing with the mask on. I'm not sure if you can see it. Oh, they do. Yeah. So they have 26 individual microphones. They hardly hear one another because singing in a circle so wide open with the conductor who's in the middle and who's only ever looking at one angle of the singers is not an easy task. So a lot was corrected in post, but it was something that actually worked quite well in the end. And I would have had difficulties, I guess, to propose to anyone to individualize the singing, because I really needed those individual voices for my soundtrack. I needed them to be both individuals and group. Depending on where you stand in the space, you can hear some breathing even, you can hear them inhaling. So there's a lot of detail in the voices. Although we reduced it to 6 speakers, but potentially we have 26 tracks that are mixed off and ready to be used at any time. So that's the production. We had this wonderful sound mixer by the name of Johan van der Malen, who's crazy enough to do this, all this mixing and the post-production of it. And this is during recording in summer, and this is during the mixing in my studio in Antwerp in wintertime. We used a space which was about, I would say, 160 square meters, quite high, so it has a lot of reverberation, and I thought that's going to look probably acoustically a little bit like the space, for example, in the museum here. And we redesigned the sound depending on the exhibition venue. So this is what we call a wet space in Milwaukee. A wet space has a lot of acoustic reverberation, but not so bad. I actually expected it to be far worse. Like, for example, the Kunsthaus Bregenz is one of the acoustically worst places you can have to show a piece that has audio. Like, even if you communicate with 2 people or you have a group in the museum, you have to use an intercom because there's so much echo, not echo, but reverberation. So there we design based upon 6 speakers on the surrounding. We designed again, you know, all these chapters are they're filled with desperation. I can assure you, there's always a moment where you think, okay, we have 75% right, and now we need to do the sound mixing. This is where it's going to go south, for sure. But it, you know, just by working and by keep on working and not having a strict deadline, very important. You kind of wiggle your way through the problems. And so I guess I'm almost at the, I wanted to end, so my presentation is over, but I wanted to end maybe with a few things that I found yesterday in my PowerPoint, and which I thought maybe I should give to you as a closure, is that as well in the close as in other works, I've always been fascinated with 2 realities that are not supposed to coexist. Whether it was the moving image and stills, or whether it was, I would say, ice or water, or there's always something that excludes the other thing. And I was always, almost any idea has this, where I see myself functioning as someone who tries to generate a third space out of those 2 incompatible realities. And a few years ago I started again, during COVID, what was it all good for, isn't it? I started studying brain science, cognitive sciences. Studying is a big word as a tourist, but I started reading up about it, and got very fascinated with the relation there is between the way we observe and the way we process the world through our eyes and our senses, and the way 3D technology works and CGI technology works. There's some really almost you couldn't believe their coincidence, and it made me I started writing a kind of philosophy, although I'm not a philosopher at all, but a philosophy of the relation between technology, cognitive science, and the history of our images, image culture. And one of the things I'm puzzled with all the time is that how do we live in a world where visual culture is dominant? Strange, isn't it? Because the other senses are as present in our experiential world. And why visual culture is dominant and produced by the lens, which is monofocal. Ourselves as biological beings, we are bifocal. And what's the relation between that? And I had many hypotheses, and they're all wrong. But at one point, I realized that the reason why we have two eyes and why we have a nervous system the way we have it has got something to do with hunting and not being hunted, with the relation between depth view and proximity view, between finding food and between not becoming food. And this lies at the origin of the reason why we have depth view. It's a way of protecting. Now, again, I'm just speculating, but I think that when we started using optics, when we started using lenses very early on, so way before the invention of the camera, that happened because we were comfortable with not being hunted. We were the hunters. And early modernity allowed us to relax a certain sense of survival, which is in our way of looking, in our way of observing the world. So we brought that which is in a distance, we brought it closer through telescopy, right? So the depth view is no longer so urgent. We subcontracted to technology. And so what we are left with is the world of language, the world of flatness, the world of signs, coding, image culture. And I was wrong by thinking that visual culture, our image culture, oppresses literature and writing, and nobody reads or writes, the common thing. And I suspect that they both share the same root, but that there is it's just a very different ecosystem of knowing and of understanding. It's all flat. So this fascination of our bifocal view versus our monofocal culture. Then I spoke about this. I drew this yesterday quickly. This tension between always two opposing factors, and it could be, as in this case, enchantment or disenchantment. And it's as if we're thought to live with highs and lows, and as if that which then, and I never agreed with that. In fact, I never agreed with that. I never thought, Because highs and lows perpetuate the culture of the internal combustion engine, for example, is that you have to have conflict before you have movement. And I never liked that idea very much. One could say I really was a kind of CGI virtual reality kind of figure. I never thought you need to have conflict in order to get somewhere. But so I don't have the answer of what the alternative of that would be. Let's say if you would look for something different than only highs and lows, only high conjuncture and depression, you could replace it with a lot of energy or no energy at all, a lot of money or no money at all. And then you'd look for average. That would be the third diagram. You'd look for average, but no one, you don't really want average. What's the other energy that you're looking for? Which is neither high and low, which doesn't try to perpetuate that philosophy, but which looks for an energy which is real, but where you can make time palpable, and where you can make time, that's always the conundrum of image making, is that you work on a flat surface, but nevertheless you're fascinated with the passage of time and with the volume in architecture and the breathing in people and in life in animation. So, and to conclude, I probably transgressed my time, but to conclude, I took this image of my studio wall right before taking the plane, just to give you an idea of how the studio works or looks like. There's still a few remnants of the drawings of the close, and then on top of that there's a few drawings of a piece called Aircraft Final Assembly Line, which is also a video I worked on together with the close. And in the middle we have, like now on top, we have some drawings that are preparing a new film, which is titled The Exploding Birdcage, for lack of a better title. It's literally going to be about two birds which are in an explosion, and the next 5 minutes they're happily sitting together and singing in the same space. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Well, I had a list of questions for you, David, all of which you answered as you spoke, which was very efficient of you. But I thought I would start with one that may be helpful for this group. And that's you sort of got there at the end of your presentation, and it was really about the change in the pictorial world order between the lens-based image making and what comes after, right, which is the world that we're transitioning to. And it struck me particularly with this piece that you chose, it's a piece that makes that transition over the course of time, but also chooses a liminal space, such as the close itself, to talk about that separation and that transition. So I wonder if there's a connection here. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that optical history, if you will, that you're tracing in this piece.
Sure, because that is what it is about. Thank you for reminding me that it's a good point. I completely forgot to address that, in fact. Is that the curve of where are we going in terms of why was optics at one point developed and invented in order to help us generate a more precise, scientifically more correct, and therefore less debatable image of the world. And one should never underestimate, I think, the importance in like world order and world peace, and really choosing my words carefully, of photography and of chosen moment where the camera got developed and where we had industrially reproducible photography. Because the idea of photography is very old, of course. It's much older than the invention by Niepce. Niepce? How do you pronounce his name, actually? Niepce.
Got it.
And he was, so between 1808 and 1830 or 1840. And then, interestingly, that created, I would say, that created a confidence system which is important for everyone. That, like, you can, upon images, you can decide not to go to war or to go to war. They're extremely important as a kind of family system to which you belong, and we all have that. We can pretend we don't, but the next thing we know is we go along with it, and I believe that's changing. So I believe that that's changing, and it's already reflecting in politics, even, I would say. But I don't know exactly how. But there seems to be a profound mistrust in what we say to one another, the way we say it. And you find it back in a slow but gradual taking over of CGI imagery in photography and in our daily lives. And at one point, I think that which we are used as experiencing as photography or just as images that we can rely upon are just going to be proposals. Just the way paintings were proposals before, let's say, around 1800. That led me to think that what was wrong with painting around 1800? And there was, I mean, if you read a little bit up on the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, you find that there is a profound, people had enough of the proposals made by a few for the many. And of course then comes photography developed through printmaking, in fact, through chemical procedures. So so that begs the question: where are we and where are we going? Yeah? It's always, but I think it's always, you always think you're in an important moment in time when you think, I witnessed this. It's not sure if it's true. It's not the kind of, we're not in the kind of revolution that maybe photography was or meant for people in the mid-19th century. We're not in that kind of, it's far more invisible. It runs far more in an undercurrent, but it's nevertheless at least as capable of changing profound belief systems. And so I think, I coined dark optics as an optics which is no longer relying on the lens. And it might have occurred to you that the lens is, the other aspect of lenses is light.
Right, and photography is light writing.
And you're at the end of a period which is historically the Enlightenment period. And I always thought that photography is the child of two lovers, illegal lovers, so to speak. One was the aging Enlightenment, and the other is the early Industrial Revolution. And they got together, but they didn't get together by some kind of coincidence. I don't really buy that.
Maybe we'll pause there and we'll take a couple of questions from the audience. Yes?
Am I right, did Vermeer use camera obscura to generate his images?
I believe they all did. I believe he might have. He might have.
Penn and Teller did a thing in the movie, and I don't know if they say
Yeah.
or something, but that's a camera,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have a film to record, but that was Vermeer doing the recording. I mean, so I'm thinking it goes back.
It goes back much earlier.
And also,
Yeah.
well, you know, the lens looking at the stars with the.
Yes, the
I mean, that's
telescope.
one
Yeah.
eye. So I'm just thinking the history is deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, we knew much earlier that optics were crucial. Like even the Jan and Hubert van Eyck, the Renaissance painters, the Flemish Renaissance painters, whom I'm always come back to because they are. Did they use optics or not? You know, it doesn't really matter. I think they thought in optics. That's for sure. They thought in optics. The Van Eyck brothers, who painted the Ghent altar, because how else could you depict matter like fur and crystal and gold, and how else could you depict it if your mindset didn't have an optical kind of clarity? You were looking for that.
That's an interesting point. We'll take another question, if anyone has one. Yes?
I'm intrigued with the fact that you go from film to stills, and then the three-dimensional part of it is stills, as opposed to, you could have taken a film of this kid spinning, done. Instead, you set up, 50 cameras, and you put the kid in the center and they all go off at one time?
Yes.
Or they all go off in sequence, like a Muybridge horse running sequence?
In this case, it's a good question. They all go off at the same time and as precise as possible. So it's not really what we know as bullet time, where you have little differences and where you would then also have movement. No, it's all at the same time. Wait, the other part of your question?
Well, because you go to still images versus movie because they're higher resolution.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And the higher resolution, then you can piece
Yeah.
that together and do more manipulation on it?
The mechanics of it is indeed, but I also wanted to stay away far from the child, not to intimidate it, and to give it the best chances for spontaneity. Because believe it or not, but one of the proposals was to have one of those very fast arms, those hydraulic arms circling around the child. And of course, they're like, how do you keep anyone relaxed when you have mechanics like that around? So there was a lot of. I was quite conservative, in fact, with the technology, but there were.
You were creating a shy system for a shy individual,
Yeah,
in a sense, which is really nice, very thoughtful.
So he was still.
Yes. Yes, there was actually, in fact, it was in the midst of movement. It's like something like 125th of a second, but that's problematic when someone's moving. And you might have noticed maybe that there is a moment where this child holds a little thing between the fingers, and it briefly moves, and that's where one of the cameras had a lag of just a fraction of a second. And this is how precise you have to work in order to.
We'll take a last question, if there is one. Another question, yes.
I saw the child as a statue, as, well, let's leave it at that.
Yeah, but that's the main point, isn't it? Is our relation to photos or moving images, can that ever become a relation that is alienated from the world out there? Could we look at people like objects? This is something you necessarily do when you're in a war. And that's why I spoke about confidence systems, is that because I'm looking for ways to move towards, there's this suggestion that the child is a statue, isn't it? That she or he doesn't have any more photographic credibility, wasn't there at one particular moment in time, which is crucial to our understanding of the photographic world, is that there was someone out there and there was a situation out there, and we are here. But what if that person becomes an object? And that brings me to one of my earlier works, which is Sections of a Happy Moment, where I try to work with them, where I worked with a family, and where they become, over time, they become objects. And can you ever believe in a representation as an object? And I don't think you can, but there's a lot of thinkers who wouldn't agree, who would say representation is representation, just like a book is a book, and that's it. And I say, no, we are believers. We are believers. We live with, we need that as oxygen. And it's a good question. This can a person become an object, and therefore how do we think about photography? Yeah.
That's an excellent place to stop.
Yeah.
David, thank you so much for
Thank you for
your
coming.
wonderful presentation. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I know you were as spellbound as I was. I hope you've enjoyed the exhibition and will continue to enjoy the exhibition for the next few weeks. Have a nice evening.